15 million people. One of the biggest, busiest cities in India. And once, the seat of British rule. This remarkable footage shows Kolkata in 1906. The cameraman's choice to shoot from a moving vehicle takes us right into the action.
There's a general sense of disorder, and within that disorder there's an order. Nobody runs over anybody. You don't bump into anybody in an Indian street. And yet when you see them, you say, God, they're going to run into each other, and you see cars or garages just getting straight, and the last minute they swerve.
It's great to see these shots of the streets of Calcutta. Crowded, but looking far emptier than they would look today. Calcutta, like most British Indian cities, was divided between the British half and the Indian part of the city. And these clips show the wealthier and commercial part of the Indian city, where Indian commerce, Indian business establishments, Indian trade was conducted, and where the British wouldn't venture very often. So actually you don't see any British on the street here in this particular scene.
Certain parts of Calcutta, like those handcarts and people wearing that attire, like that is still followed here. That's why I liked it. I really liked it. Like, it's still present. Even now it's still present, some part of it. The British architecture is still like very much prominent in Calcutta as far compared to other cities as well. Like, it has a heritage kind of vibe here.
I call it the vintage city. Still living in old times.
Today, buildings like the Victoria Memorial are a reminder of Kolkata's colonial past.
Calcutta was meant to compete with the Mughal capital of Delhi. Its monuments are spectacular. No other British Indian city can match up to Kolkata in terms of its monumental character.
Calcutta at the time was a very glamorous place, so it was the seat of empire, it was the seat of Indian modernity in some ways. A good chunk of the nationalistic impulse was born in Calcutta because this is where educated Indians were in contact with the English, and democratic ideas were slowly emerging in their minds.
India was the crown jewel of the British Empire and a vital source of its wealth. Much of it built on Calcutta's port and on the back of Indian labor. We now see the shores of the Hooghly River, then, as now, a hub of activity.
Calcutta was a great port city. It was the destination for all the produce of the tea gardens of northern India and Assam and Darjeeling. And it was also the port from which much of India's agricultural products like indigo and jute were exported. Now we see some of the river boats. These are very interesting to see the kind of rivercraft that Indians used. They're wooden boats with high hulls, and then lots of low rivercraft which were used for transporting people and goods. You get a real sense of the labor, digging, carrying, pushing, and you see how the comforts of the empire that the British enjoyed, mostly back home, but also in India, of course, were built on this massive labor that Indians provided. And then you see in the background there the hull of a great British steamship. Of course, that revolutionized connections between Britain and India when they were introduced in the last decades of the 19th century.
The expansion of global shipping fueled other industries at Calcutta's bustling port. One of them was the making of marine cables from the fibers of the hemp plant. A laborious process, seen for the first time on film in this footage from 1909.
Hemp was very, very important to the economy because it was one such fiber which could be used a lot for marine purposes, for cables, sacks, bags, packaging materials. Even in those days, it wasn't just done by hand. They had these machines. I think is amazing in those days to be able to film it.
Some scenes in this are absolutely beautifully framed and shot.
There's real thought that has gone into the lighting of the scenes, to the way that the people have situated in it, the movement across the materials themselves.
At last we see the marine cable. A rope so formidable, it looks like it could crush these men if they are not careful. The workers heave the cable onto a waiting barge. Job finally done, it's time for a break. We imagine that 100 years ago in India, people would have taken a break as many do now, with a strong cup of tea. Tea is so closely bound with our image of India, it may surprise you to know that it's not a native drink.
You won't get anyone drinking a cup of tea until about, I don't know, ordinary Indians wouldn't have seen head or tail of it much before 1850. And it wouldn't have become a general thing, I imagine, until the early 20th century.
Indians were soon addicted to tea, as were the British. By 1935, tea was a major industry, and scenes of its plantations were a staple of imperial travelogues to introduce India to a global audience.
These, like many other young things, spend the first year of their lives in a nursery.
I love this accent. In a nursery. Plantations.
The plants are fenced in for protection against prowling jungle animals, and they're also sheltered from the fierce heat of the sun. 5 years of close and careful attention must be bestowed upon the young plants.
The accents sound like something from ancient history, but if you go up to Assam, you see the tea picking in exactly the same way. You could literally take the same shot today with the same women wearing the same saris, the same production methods. But the only thing that's dated is the fantastic pre-war British accents.
The leaves, green now of course, are weighed and taken in bullock carts to the factory.
You see here the tea going from being picked to being dried. Young children are doing the labor there, young boys, and then to being sorted by a machine, and then finally packaged into the tea chests, which would take the tea to Britain and across the world. Much of the labor for this tea production was brought in from the plains, often in pretty unpleasant circumstances. The use of effectively indentured labor on the tea